Irish Rural Link represents the interests of community groups in disadvantaged and marginalised rural areas by highlighting problems, advocating appropriate policies and sharing experiences.
Irish Rural Link were really established to be a voice, not the voice, but a voice in advocating for rural communities.
Back in 1991, there was a conference held on a Saturday in Etterfrack, in the Connemara West Centre, Etterfrack, looking at the issues and challenges facing rural Ireland. And one of the proposals that came from that conference was that a national body should be formed to campaign vigorously for rural communities. And that organisation was called Irish Rural Link.
The organisation set up in 91, and prior to that there was very little, there was nothing much for in rural Ireland. In terms, well, there was the standard organisations like Morecambe, Winter, IFA, ICMSA, all the other sort of national organisations, but there was very little to look at rural affairs specifically. It was definitely more about policy, certainly in the early years, yeah, it was very much about policy to get governments focused in on the need for social change in rural Ireland.
I've been involved in Irish Rural Link almost since the very start. In November, 14 November 1995 was one of the 7 signatures. We were called special members when we were establishing Irish Rural Link as a cooperative. We had an idea, we thought we could do something, we weren't sure what we could do because we had very little resources. Because there were lots of issues in rural Ireland at that time. We felt that government weren't giving equity to rural Ireland, and Irish Rural Link had the vision to open up its membership to corporate bodies as well, which was very innovative. Irish Rural Link wanted to become the voice of the voiceless, and many of those people were voiceless, and they had issues that were not farm related.
The best way to describe Irish Rural Link and the difference between it and maybe the agricultural organisations who also advocate on rural policy was the agricultural organisations advocate for the person behind the farm gate on the farm, and the Irish Rural Link advocate for the people who are living in the rural communities but not necessarily farming. So the sons and daughters who farm are one side, and the ones who don't farm but live in the area are the other side. And we tend to, I suppose, look at the wider rural development. And it was clear there was no real voice talking about that, equally talking about the different minorities that exist in rural Ireland, whether it's gender, whether it's immigrants, whether it's racial. We do take up those viewpoints, but also we represent from a poverty perspective, because Irish Rural Link was one of 10 poverty groups that was formed nationally back then, and we talk about rural poverty a great deal. So I think we were always influencing policy, and I think we are a necessary voice in that area.
Well, I suppose the one thing I think was a huge achievement and which helped the organisation in sort of the transition in difficult times was the actually building of a headquarters. So it was a source of income in the difficult times. So that was an achievement. Without that, it might have been much more difficult to survive.
In terms of the mission statement for Irish Rural Link, and if they've changed over the last 30 years, I actually don't think they have. I mean, to influence, inform local, national and European development in favour of rural communities, that's our mission. A shorter way of looking at that is sustainable rural communities. That hasn't changed from the day we were first formed, and it still continues to be the case, because the reality facing rural communities hasn't changed. Depopulation has always been there, lack of job opportunities has always been there, lack of access to services, to health, education, and indeed the way we manage our transport system. So obviously the mission statement to be in favour of rural communities, sustainable rural communities, is a really good one.
Irish Rural Link has grown considerably over the last number of years and is a creative and vibrant organisation that supports community engagement and community advocacy, which are two key pillars of building resilient communities.
The European connections have always been there, and we've always been reaching out to rural type organisations across Europe, And that's essential because the European dimension is big. We have the Common Agricultural Policy, which effectively is the major rural medium of funding. And of course, from our perspective, we need to see that that funding reaches to the wider rural community, as I just said, not just agriculture. So the programs like LEADER and others provide a major part of that, and Irish Rural Link have been or have had a presence in Brussels at influencing level over the years, and that's the way it is. That continues, and I see that as an essential part of what Irish Rural Link do. I suppose looking at our achievements over the last 30 years, I think a couple of things, both structural and positive. We've always said that we are part of a wider set of voices in the rural hinterland. So the achievements are part of all of our success. Obviously, Irish Rural Link strongly supported the idea of a better rural transport programme, and that morphed into different levels. It's now called Local Link. We were there at the very beginning of that, and we really sought to ensure that that particular programme would continue. The other achievement is we put the rural agenda on the government's agenda, and we've continued to do that successfully. And I suppose we also, from a purely practical perspective, brought together a fulcrum where rural organisations, whether they are in Donegal or Kerry or the Midlands or Mayo or wherever, could find a focus point in order to get somebody to represent them. And I think we've managed to do that very well.
I believe that Irish Rural Link will continue to grow and to provide meaningful opportunities for rural communities to have their voice heard. And we've seen the impact of the work carried out by Irish Rural Link during the pandemic, particularly the Community Champions Initiative, which was a vital resource for rural communities and really showed how rural communities pulled together and showed the resilience of people in supporting each other throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, I guess at the start of the pandemic, I suppose there was a feeling out there that the GA clubs and the rugby club and the soccer clubs were all volunteering to make sure the messages were delivered and the medicine was got out there. But I think Irish Rural Link just saw maybe that there might be some slippage in all that and came up with a scheme called the Community Champions for each county. So I was approached and asked would I be the Community Champion for Clare. And through the network of champions around the country, so much good came out of it. And even here, I had people from other counties who were living maybe in West Clare here contacted me and said, do you know the champion for Longford or Meath or wherever? And you could put them in contact and say, look, I have an uncle living there, not too sure how things are going, could I just get it checked out maybe with the local community volunteer group? And they're the people you were liaising with the whole time. So Rural Link are fantastic, and the feedback all the time that we, and the backing we got as community champions was incredible. There was no time you couldn't pick up the phone to Maria, any of them.
So there are many challenges faced by rural communities: climate change, lack of transport, employment, access to health services. But I believe that challenges can bring opportunity, and there is a real opportunity now to foster that spirit of engagement and to have multi-level approaches within our communities that involve a wide range of societal and environmental and economic responses. And community well-being is really essential if we want our communities to fulfil their potential. So we need things like proper funding supports and aggregated data in order for us to be able to do this. And I think it's really important that we have integrated responses from our government departments as well as our communities ourselves. And I think the role of Irish Rural Link is really important there in bringing that grassroots voice to the national level.
Depopulation is just an ongoing reality. The local school just back here, 200 yards, is closed. We've now merged to one school from 3 schools, which is down the road a couple of miles. So that'll tell you, the community, I see it here in the bar, it's really, you're relying on the local football club and,
So the issues that we were campaigning for at the time when we established Irish Rural Link are still the same issues today, except the language has changed.
I think in terms of the challenges and opportunities for rural communities over the next 30 years, They will continue to be based on access to services, employment. They will also be on the way we plan our communities. We're now moving from a situation which we always advocated for, was much more work opportunities at home.
I would like to see Ireland in 2051 with sustainable, engaged, resilient rural communities that have benefited from successful policy implementations, so that we have, for example, fit for purpose transport scheme, access to health services, reliable broadband, and enhanced public services that really benefit our rural communities. Connectivity is an important concept for us. It's been talked a lot about during the pandemic, and I think that we will have a much more connected rural Ireland. And by connected, I don't just mean digitally, but connected to each other and to our rural counterparts across the country.
Irish Rural Link's role in these is really to challenge. And Irish Rural Link sometimes get very unpopular in challenging norms, even within our rural community. Because our job is not just to identify and advocate on behalf of rural communities to government, whether they're at national, rural or local level. We will do that, we will continue to do that. But our job is also to lead rural communities and to challenge some of the norms that exist in rural communities, because sometimes we think something works very well, but we haven't looked at the alternative. But certainly my vision for Irish Rural Link is it continues to stay on the ground with people, understanding the needs of rural areas, understanding what it requires to make it a sustainable rural community.
A great sense of local identity, that's a big thing. And
they punch up way above their weight at national level, that's a credit to not just the CEO and the staff of Irish Link, but also the board and also the members as well.
Rural Ireland is a beautiful and lovely place to live in. We just want to make sure that everybody, irrespective of their background, disability or any other infringement, can live there comfortably. And I think that's the vision that I have for Irish Rural Link.